They said the wind changed the day she arrived. And in a place like Red Hollow, men believed the wind carried judgment. It was a dry town carved from dust and stubbornness, where the church bell rang louder than mercy and whispers traveled faster than truth. She came walking through that wind at dusk. Alone, boots worn thin, dress faded by miles. Eyes steady as if she had already seen worse than what waited here. Her name was Eliza Harrow, though most would soon forget it, replacing it with a word easier to spit than understand, witch. It started with small things. The farmer's boy burned with fever, and she laid a cool cloth on his head and whispered old remedies her grandmother once taught her. By morning, the boy's breathing eased. When the cattle sickness spread, she brewed bitter herbs and smoke cleansed the barn. The animals lived. But gratitude in Red Hollow curdled quickly into suspicion. She knows things, they muttered. Things women shouldn't. And when the drought broke with a violent storm, the very night she prayed alone in the hills, the town decided coincidence was confession. Pastor Caleb Rowan stood at the pulpit the following Sunday, voice trembling with righteousness. He spoke of darkness wearing a gentle face, of wolves in lamb's clothing, of sin that walked upright among them. Eyes turned toward Eliza sitting alone in the back pew. She didn't lower her gaze. That unsettled them most. Fear needs submission to survive, and she would not bow. The first stone wasn't thrown by a man. It came from a woman who had once thanked Eliza for saving her child. It struck the dirt at her feet as she stepped outside the church. The second hit her shoulder. By nightfall, the decision was made. A trial without evidence. A verdict without defense. Justice without mercy. They bound her wrists at dawn. The town square filled quickly, as if cruelty were entertainment. Children were lifted onto shoulders. Shopkeepers closed their doors not in protest but to watch. The wooden post had been dragged to the center. Logs stacked carefully around it like some ceremonial offering. Eliza stood silent as they tied her tight against the rough timber. Her hair fell loose around her face, strands catching the rising wind. The sheriff, Thomas Avery, avoided her eyes. He had once shared coffee with her on his porch. Now he read charges from a paper he didn't write. Consorting with evil. Sorcery. Blasphemy. Each word echoed hollow against the storefronts. Say something, someone shouted. Confess. Another demanded. But Eliza only lifted her chin. Smoke from the torches curled upward as if impatient. Pastor Rowan approached her, face drawn tight with conviction. Repent, he whispered so only she could hear. Give them something to calm their fear. She studied him. Not with anger, but with something that looked dangerously like pity. Fear does not calm, she replied softly. It feeds. That was enough. Rowan stepped back and gave the nod. The torch touched wood. Flames crackled hungrily, licking the dry logs. Orange tongues reaching upward with greedy delight. Heat pressed against her skin, fierce and suffocating. The crowd stepped back from the intensity yet leaned forward for the spectacle. Smoke began to coil around her waist, then her shoulders. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, not from clouds, but from hooves. No one noticed at first. The roar of fire swallowed the sound. But the horses tethered along the street grew restless. Ears flicking, hooves pawing dust. Then it came again, louder, closer. A single rider burst from the far end of the street. Silhouette framed in sun and smoke. Black coat flaring behind him, hat low over sharp eyes. Rifle strapped across his back and twin revolvers resting easy at his hips. He did not slow. The crowd parted too late. His horse charged straight toward the inferno. Gasps shattered the air. Sheriff Avery reached for his sidearm but hesitated. The rider spurred forward, guiding the animal through sparks and smoke with terrifying precision. Flames curled around the horse's legs as it leapt the outer ring of burning wood. The rider swung down in one fluid motion before the animal had fully stopped moving. Heat blistered the air. But he moved through it like a man who had long ago made peace with fire. 2 shots exploded skyward. Silence followed. He holstered one revolver and with the other shot the rope binding her wrists. Fibers snapped. He tore his coat free and wrapped it around her shoulders, shielding her from the worst of the flames. With a powerful kick, he scattered burning logs aside, clearing a path. Eliza staggered, weakened by smoke, but he caught her before she fell. "Get behind me," he said, voice low and steady as iron. Pastor Rowan found his voice first. "You interfere with God's judgment," he shouted. The stranger turned slowly, eyes scanning the circle of faces, fearful, angry, uncertain. "God doesn't need help from cowards," he replied evenly. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sheriff Avery stepped forward now, hand trembling near his holster. "You're breaking the law," he said. The gunslinger's gaze met his. "No," he answered. "I'm correcting it." Tension snapped like pulled wire. Several men reached for weapons. The gunslinger moved faster than thought. In a blur of motion and thunderous cracks, he shot the pistols from 2 hands without drawing blood. Another man's hat flew clean off his head from a grazing bullet. Precision. Warning. Mastery. Smoke. From gunfire mixed with smoke from flames, turning the square into a haze of confusion. "Anyone else?" he asked quietly. No one answered. The fire still burned behind him, but now it seemed smaller, uncertain. He helped Eliza toward his horse. She looked at him fully for the first time, eyes reflecting both trauma and strength. "Why?" she asked, voice rough from smoke. He paused, only a heartbeat. "Because I've seen this before," he said. "And I didn't stop it last time." He lifted her into the saddle and mounted behind her in one smooth motion. Sheriff Avery stepped aside, not in defeat, but in shame. The crowd watched as the rider turned the horse toward the open desert beyond town. Pastor Rowan shouted one final warning. "She'll bring ruin upon you." The gunslinger didn't look back. "Ruin already lives here," he said, and with that, he rode. Dust swallowed them quickly. But the silence left behind was heavier than any sermon. Flames died slowly in the square, crackling down to embers. No one spoke. The wind shifted again, carrying away smoke, and something else. Doubt. And as Red Hollow stood in the aftermath of its own hatred, the townsfolk did not yet understand that the true reckoning had only begun. If you want the intensity to rise even higher in Chapter 1 Part 2, where we reveal who the gunslinger is and what dark history ties him to this town. Tell me to continue. The desert did not forgive weakness. And neither did the man riding through it with a half-conscious woman in his arms. The flames of Red Hollow, shrinking behind them into nothing but smoke against the horizon. Yet the fire had not been left behind, it rode with them. Burning in memory, in guilt, in unfinished reckoning. The gunslinger did not speak for miles, his jaw set hard as stone, eyes fixed on the wavering line where sand met sky. But Eliza felt the tension in him like a coiled wire ready to snap. They stopped only when the sun dipped low and painted the world in blood-orange light. He slid from the saddle first, steadying her as her boots touched ground. She was stronger than she looked. Smoke had blackened the edges of her sleeves. Rope burns circled her wrists. Yet her spine remained straight. She studied him carefully now. This stranger who had ridden through fire without hesitation. "You knew my name," she said quietly. He paused while pouring water into a tin cup. "I asked about you before I rode in," he replied. Though that was not the full truth. He had known about her weeks before. Whispers travel fast in lawless territories, and so do injustices. A healer accused. A town afraid. It had sounded familiar. Too familiar. They made camp beneath a crooked mesquite tree. Night brought cold, and with it came honesty. The gunslinger finally removed his hat, revealing scars that firelight could not soften. "My name is Jonah Creed," he said, voice low. The name meant nothing to her, yet it once meant something to Red Hollow. 10 years ago, Jonah Creed had worn a badge in that very town. He had believed in law then. Believed that people, given structure and consequence, would choose decency. He had been wrong. There had been another accusation. Another frightened crowd. Another woman tied to a post. Her crime had been loving a man the town despised. Jonah had hesitated that day. He had listened to reason. To procedure. To caution. By the time he chose courage, the flames had already taken her. His wife. He closed his eyes now, as if. Even the memory burned. "I won't watch it happen twice," he said simply. Eliza listened without interruption. When he finished, she surprised him. "You carry blame that isn't yours alone," she said. He gave a humorless half-smile. "Doesn't make it lighter." The fire between them crackled softly. A gentler flame than the one meant to kill her. "They fear what they don't understand," she continued. "Fear needs a sacrifice." Jonah looked at her sharply. "And you?" he asked. "What do you fear?" For the first time, something flickered behind her steady gaze. "That they will never learn," she admitted. Dawn brought riders. Jonah heard them before he saw them, hooves beating hard against earth. Too many for coincidence. Red Hollow had not let them go. Sheriff Avery led the posse, Pastor Rowan beside him. And a cluster of armed men hungry for redemption of their pride. Dust rose behind them like a second storm. Jonah stood slowly, adjusting his gun belt. "Stay behind me," he said. Eliza stepped forward instead. "No," she replied calmly. "This ends differently." He frowned, but there was no time to argue. The posse circled at a distance. Sheriff Avery's face was torn between duty and doubt. Pastor Rowan's held only fury. "Hand her over," Rowan demanded. "Or you'll hang beside her." Jonah's voice remained steady. "You rode all this way to finish what you started? Or to convince yourselves you were right?" Murmurs rippled among the men. Doubt had followed them from town. Rowan pointed a shaking finger. "She brings curses. Storms. Sickness." Eliza stepped out fully now, smoke-stained but unbroken. "If I had such power," she called clearly. "Do you truly believe I would have stood silent while you tied me to burn?" The question struck harder than any bullet. Some of the men shifted uneasily. She continued, voice rising not in anger but in strength. "The boy I healed breathes because of herbs your grandmothers once used. The cattle lived because knowledge was passed down before fear replaced wisdom. You call it witchcraft. Because you have forgotten your own history." Silence. Stretched across the desert. Pastor Rowan drew his pistol first. The crack of the shot split the air, but Jonah had already moved. His return fire knocked the weapon from Rowan's hand in a clean, precise strike. The posse erupted in chaos. Guns flashed. Horses screamed. Dust exploded upward in blinding clouds. Jonah moved like the storm they accused her of summoning, controlled. Unstoppable, every shot deliberate. He disabled, disarmed, dismantled. No killing unless forced. Sheriff Avery found himself face to face with Jonah at last. Guns aimed but hands trembling. "It doesn't have to be this way," Jonah said. "It already is," Avery replied, but his finger loosened from the trigger. He lowered his weapon first. That was the fracture point. One by one, others followed. All except Rowan. Consumed by humiliation and fanatic resolve. The pastor lunged for a fallen rifle, rage eclipsing reason. He aimed not at Jonah, but at Eliza. The shot rang out. Time slowed. Jonah turned, but he was a fraction too far. Eliza did not flinch. The bullet struck the metal buckle at her waist, deflecting with a sharp spark and tearing through fabric without piercing flesh. Gasps filled the air. Rowan stared in disbelief. To him, it was proof of sorcery. To everyone else, it was chance, or perhaps something else entirely, the collapse of certainty. Jonah's final shot shattered the rifle in Rowan's hands. The pastor fell to his knees, not wounded, but undone. The desert grew still. Sheriff Avery dismounted slowly and approached Eliza, removing his hat. In that small gesture lay apology, regret, and the first fragile thread of change. "We were wrong," he said hoarsely. It was not loud, but it carried. Rowan began to laugh weakly, muttering about signs and devils, but no one listened now. The fire he had tried to command had turned against him, exposing fear as the true enemy. Eliza stepped forward once more, meeting the eyes of the men who had nearly killed her. "You don't need to fear knowledge," she said gently. "You need to fear ignorance." The words did not accuse. They invited. And something shifted. Not instantly. Not completely. But undeniably. Sheriff Avery ordered Rowan taken back to town, not as a martyr, but to answer for attempted murder. The posse dispersed, subdued not by bullets, but by confrontation with their own reflection. When they were gone, only dust and quiet remained. Jonah looked at Eliza, searching her face for cracks. He found none. "You could leave," he said. "Find another town." She considered the horizon. Then the distant outline of Red Hollow barely visible against the heat shimmer. "If I leave," she replied, "they learn nothing." He studied her a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then you won't go back alone." Weeks later, Red Hollow looked different. Not transformed into perfection, towns rarely change that easily, but softened. Eliza worked openly now. Tending fevers, teaching remedies, sharing knowledge instead of hiding it. Suspicion did not vanish overnight, but it no longer ruled unchallenged. Sheriff Avery enforced law with renewed humility. And Jonah Creed. He did not wear a badge again, but he remained. Some said the gunslinger who rode through flames became the quiet guardian of the town he once abandoned. Others said he stayed because of the woman who stood unburned at the center of it. Perhaps both were true. The story of that day spread far beyond Red Hollow. They spoke of the witch who wasn't a witch, of the fire that failed, of the gunslinger who rode straight through flames without hesitation. But those who were there remembered something deeper: fear can ignite a blaze, but courage can walk through it. And if this story moved you, if you believe courage should always answer cruelty, and truth should always challenge fear, then make sure you subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Because legends aren't born,